Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel. Well, here we are with the mini bike, and we were riding the mini bike the other day, and the front wheel actually nearly fell off the mini bike. So today, we're going to show you what the problem was, and we're going to get into it, and we're going to fix the mini bike up. So let's get into it. So we were actually really lucky that neither the mini bike got damaged or nobody actually got hurt. But what actually happened was the nut came off this axle, and the axle must have just slipped out enough that the whole wheel just bent up sideways in the frame. And as you can see, there's just a little bit of a rub mark in here on the frame. Apart from that, the person that was riding it realized something was wrong straight away and they pulled it up. But then we've managed to go and find a nut. We've got a problem with the threads. The threads are all actually flattened down on this axle, so we're going to have to address that as well. I'll show you that in a minute, but we'll just come around to the back of the mini bike, because I'm going to do some more thorough inspection of this mini bike and how it's been assembled, just to check we're not going to have any other problems like this again. So let's have a look down the back end. So just looking down here at the rear axle, you can see this has got an axle that comes all the way through the rear wheel there. You can actually see there's a nut here, and I'm going to assume it was actually the similar nut on the front. We've actually lost the nut, but you can actually see there's no evidence. See, that nut is screwed all the way on. There's no evidence of an actual split pin hole. But if we come back to the actual axle that came off the front, there was an actual split pin hole. I'll just show you if the camera will focus. However, clearly the threads have not actually burred over, so there was never a split pin inserted. And I'm going to assume it had a nut like this on, which is why it's come off. But we've actually purchased a Castle nut. Now, I'll show you what the issue is with the Castle nut. It threads on, however, it only goes so far. And that's because, obviously, when the nut has fallen off and the axle has worked its way out, it's fallen and flattened off the thread. So we need to clean those threads up. Now, what's going to be interesting is, clearly, it'll probably be the same thread. I'm thinking this axle probably has a split pin in it as well, but because they've used those nuts instead of a Castle nut, they haven't inserted the split pins. But today we're going to address this one. You can see that's tight there, so for now that's good enough. But you can see, as I showed you before, that's only threading on so far. So we need to clean those threads up. So because this axle is a hardened steel axle, the last thing we want to do is to force that nut on. We actually want to clean it up with a die. So I've gone and got the correct size die. Happens to be a 916 UNF die. Now, we don't want to use that dry, so I've just got some bar oil here, just because that's what I've got lying around, but any oil will actually do the trick, just to give it some lubrication as that goes in through that die. And we just want to screw that in, make sure it's not cross-threaded to start with. So that's perfect, just going down. And then you can see it's become tight. So I'll just get my spanner on the top here. And we'll just thread that axle into that die. Now that's just going to be cleaning up those threads nicely. This is the correct way to do it. Like I said, if you just force the nut on, you really are risking all sorts of problems that you don't really need. So just work that up and down like that. That's going to clean those threads up nicely. You can see there's those little filings have come up, and that's just going in and out. Now, I'll just wind it in and out a couple of times. So now I can do it by hand, which is good. And you can see clearly in here those metal filings that have come off that axle as we've cleaned that thread. So I'll just get that out now. So now that we've run the threads of the axle through that die there, we can actually get our Castle nut, and you can see this spins on really easily. You can see I'm just threading that on by hand. It's all the way up and it can go back. But importantly, I'll just come around and show you. You can see now we've got that hole, which should have had a split pin through it all along. We're going to be able to tighten it to the point where it's just tight, and then move that Castle nut around, and then we'll put that split pin in. So with the split pin in, we won't have that problem again where the nut comes off. And in the long term, what I'm going to do is I'll probably put a castle nut on the rear. Well, to start with, we'll take that rear nut off and have a look to see if there's a split pin hole in the axle, but I think there probably is. So anyway, for now, let's get this axle back on the front wheel and let's go and enjoy the mini bike. Okay, so let's get this axle back into the front wheel. Now, importantly, we've got a couple of spaces here that came off. Fortunately, we didn't lose those. So I'm going to say they probably go on the inside of each side. So let's get that in like that. And then we need to get that mini bike wheel up in and around. Let's get that lifted up into position. So then we've got to get the spacer in on this side. It's probably going to be a little bit tricky, but let's see how we go. Just if we just knock that axle out a little bit and then lift that front wheel up into position, hopefully we can get it. Just like that, we've got that axle through now. Now hopefully, I don't know if there's actually going to be enough thread to actually allow that castle nut to pull in. Now I suspect that's why it actually never may have had, but let's just tighten that up as it is now. We'll tighten that up and see if it actually pulls those couple of front forks in or not, enough to be able to get that split pin through. So as you can see, we've done that castle nut all the way up tight. However, the length of the axle is simply not long enough that the split pin hole actually is visible to the slots for the castle nut. So that's the problem that we're now faced with here. And to be honest, I think that's the actual problem as to why it never had a split pin in there. So what I've done, folks, is a little bit of an experiment here. I've just removed this shim on this side completely. And as you can see, I've still got the shim on this side, but then when I tighten the castle nut here, you can see I'm actually able to get that in far enough that the split pin will actually go through the main axle, because obviously there's enough flex in these two front forks. The problem obviously is without a shim on this side, that wheel just binds up. So what I think we need to do is we just need to modify these shims. Perhaps we can grind down a little bit off of these shims, make them half the size, and then put it back together so it won't bind up on the shaft of the wheel there, and it will run freely. So let's do that. So to start with, what I'm going to do is just use a file by hand, because I don't want to take too much off of these shims. You can see that straight away is shining that up. So I'll just work that for a little bit. See how much material we can get off of the shims by hand, and then we'll just trial and error, because if you take too much off, then you can't get it back. So that's why I'm doing it by hand, folks. Let's do it by hand. We'll do a test fit back on the mini bike and we'll see how it goes. Take it from there. So after a lot of filing, we've been able to reinsert the axle with both bushes, and you can see that now we actually have probably a 2-3 mil gap, which we'll use the castle nut to flex those forks in. And let's see if we can get the castle nut now on and a split pin through that hole. So we've now got the castle nut lined up with the hole for the split pin, and as you can see, we're able to get that split pin through that hole. So now it's just a matter of flexing that split pin around. So we'll just bend that over the top like that, and now we won't have that problem where the nut comes off again, because the split pin stops the nut unspinning. So with the front wheel of the mini bike back on, it's time to take the test ride. So let's do a cold start. If you've seen my channel, you know I love a good cold start. So let's turn the fuel on, give it some choke, and pull the handle. But I think I've got the kill switch switched off, so just flick that up there and we'll pull it again. There we go. What a beauty, guys. first pull, you know. So let's take the mini bike for a test ride. So there you go, folks. That's that quick and simple fix really on this mini bike. As you can see, it was probably never assembled properly out of the factory. Someone had those shims too big, so they were using a castle nut. They clearly couldn't get the castle nut onto the split fitting. So we filed down those shims today, using what tools I had available to me up here at the farm, because limited on tools, but no power tools or grinders. But we've got the castle nut on, not a split fitting, so that's not coming off again. So if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button, drop a comment below. We just love reading through all of those comments. And if you're interested in any other content on the channel, you see us fixing and maintaining the Mercedes, the Audi, the Aston 3 and the early Ford Falcon. If you're interested in that content, please hit that subscribe button. Until next time, have a good evening.